Terror Project's response to the rape of Celeste Guap. And I asked James Orich, what the bleep do we pay them for? And I didn't ask, and I'm much filled with much more emotion than what I'm displaying today. Celeste Guap came on the heels of 2015, what I call bloody 2015, where the Oakland Police Department murdered 11 Black men, to which there has been no accountability, no restoration, no repair, and certainly no justice. Last year, California law enforcement murdered over 1,000 people across this country. The vast majority of them unarmed. And compared to how many the percentage of Black folks that make up America, way too many Black names on that list. There is a genocide happening against Black bodies in this country, and we're a little exhausted of trying to prove it. This campaign was born out of a desperate desire to save lives, because we are tired. We are thoroughly drained of all of our energy and effort of watching Black porn on social media networks, which is our unarmed bodies falling at the hands of law enforcement. And many people, some people then turn and say, well, what about Black on Black crime? First of all, can we stop using that term? White people kill white people because they're in closest proximity to them. Latinx people kill Latinx people because they're in closest proximity to them. Asian folks kill Asian folks because they're in closest proximity to them. And Black folks kill Black folks because we're in closest proximity to them, to each other. America is not as desegregated as we would like to believe. That's A. B, all violence is state violence. And it's not that we only mourn the bodies that drop at the hands of law enforcement. We mourn the loss of all of our brothers and sisters and people. And we're also clear that we live in a system that locks Black bodies of every single possible pathway to forming thriving lives. We lock folks out of the above ground economy and then expect them not to make a living in the underground economy, expect them not to eat, put a roof over their head, put clothes on their body, things that many of us take for granted. America creates the conditions for so-called crime. America is responsible for the thousands of Black and brown bodies that fell across this country last year. The other thing that is important in this moment and what we're talking about now, right, reimagining public safety, the local law enforcement and some other folks, right, even folks that share my skin tone, have said, well, we can't possibly do this right now. Look at the uptick in violence. That is a false and faulty logic. The violence is happening now while the Oakland Police Department has the money now. And if their strategy of militarized police and being occupying armies in our communities and incarcerating our people worked, we wouldn't have seen the uptick in violence and they would have been able to deal with it. But they can't. You know why? Because the cyclical nightmare of mass incarceration doesn't work. We take people that are suffering from trauma and harm, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, whatever it is, that have engaged in behavior that we don't want in our communities. We throw them into one of the most violent institutions known in the world, and then we spit them back out with no resources or support to change, to evolve. It's illogical, it's irrational, and you know what? It's a setup. And our job as organizers, our commitment as organizers is to interrupt the setup and change the game for our people. And that's what this process has been about. That's what the Defund OPD campaign has been about, is understanding that we need to interrupt the insanity of funding racism, of funding hate, of funding violence in an attempt to bring about peace. It doesn't work. It's not working. And it's not working for any of us. It's not working for Black folks, and it's not working for white folks either. And so we're in this moment, right? I've heard people talk about this as just the beginning. This is nowhere near a beginning. Black folks have been struggling for our liberation since the first one was kidnapped and brought to these shores. We stand on the shoulders of amazing organizers and freedom fighters. And I've also heard that word, organizer, somehow become a four-letter word out of the mouths of elected officials and others. I'm proud to be an organizer, and I'm proud to be on this call with other organizers. Organizers integrated this country. Organizers ended Jim Crow. Organizers are why you can sit, Black folks and brown folks can sit in their homes and go to schools and get a higher education. We fight for all of that. But organizers, anything that we've got as BIPOC people, it's because of organizers. Trained organizers who understand about building power and building base and engaging the people, right? Listening to the people, serving the people. We don't go tell the people what to do and then somehow give them some magic potion that brainwashes them into believing that they should follow us. We are not Peter Pan with the, they're not the flute dude. We go in and we meet the folks where they're at. And then we develop leadership demands and we leverage power to make qualitative changes in our communities. Everybody want to celebrate Georgia? Kiss a Black organizer. That orange dude's not in the White House anymore. Kiss a Black organizer. Almost every single major thing that has happened in this country, you better kiss the Black organizer because we bled for it. So you go ahead and you use that like it's a 4-letter word. I'm proud to be an organizer. I'm proud to have that training. I'm grateful to Karen Bass and Sylvia Castillo and Anthony Thigpen for investing in me so that I could better serve my community. And it's organizers that got us to this moment. Organizers in partnership and in service of the people that got us here. And anybody who tells you anything different is full of it. Is full of it. And they're not connected to the people. I don't care what zip code they live in. And those are just the facts. I guess I should have started this by saying my name is Kat Brooks and I'm the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project and the executive director of the Justice Teams Network. And thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank my team who have spent since Friday, the last few days, turning around what I believe is a beautiful analysis of the 114 recommendations that came from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Also, let's get a little context. So from the Defund OPD campaign being launched 5 years ago, we then created the Defund Police Coalition, which is made up of 12 BIPOC-led organizations who have thousands and thousands of members in the flatlands of Oakland. We fought and won this task force, right, with the people. This was a demand of the people so that we transitioned from a city that spends 50% of our budget on futile and useless policing with the understanding that we need to fund the root cause. We need to fund investment in root causes, preventative strategies. We want to get to the bullet before the gun flies. And we did that in partnerships with electeds who believed in us. Councilmember Nikki Bass, Councilmember Rebecca Kaplan. The report is now in the chat for reporters and others to access. Before she was on council, Sister Carol Fife. Those are the folks that have been in partnership with us and how Macro was born. So today, I've said a lot. Today you're going to hear from Sabir Lockett, Director of Faith Alliance for a Moral Economy of the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, EBASE, who's going to respond to the culture recommendations. Liz Sook, Interim Executive Director of Oakland Rising, who's going to respond to the budget and data recommendations. James Birch, Policy Director at the Anti-Police Terror Project and Justice Teams Network and member of the task force, who will respond to the alternatives recommendations. Maureen Benson, who will respond to the legal barriers obstacles section, and Ivan Garcia, who will speak to the youth recommendation section. And then we're going to have some time for questions and answers for you all. The people that we've asked to speak are folks that sat on the advisory boards. Can't move on without saying that. Thank you to the hundreds of advisory board members who dedicated your time, talents, and turned around these 114 heartfelt, well-researched, strategic, and tactical recommendations for reimagining public safety in our city, and understanding that what we do in Oakland impacts the entire country. We get calls, APTP, every week. What are you guys doing? How are you doing it? We want to defund too. And that's been the case, at least for the last decade, right? Saving lives here saves lives everywhere. All right, I'm going to stop now. And I am going to turn the, I'm gonna turn it over to Sabir Lockett. Sabir.
Thank you, Kat, for that beautiful introduction. and that grounding opening. Hello, my name is Sabir Lockett, and I am Director of Faith Alliance for a More Economy at the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy. But it's something else I want to talk about too, who I am. I'm also a person who was formerly incarcerated. And when we say those who are closest to the problems have the answers, this is what I want to point out, because not only was I incarcerated, but I served 22 years on a double life sentence on a level 4 penitentiary. So I know what it is to not have resources. I know what it is to therefore be given an opportunity to change. So in addition to having a director's title today, in addition to being a commissioner in the city of Oakland, I am also a person directly connected to the problems that we are facing with police terrorism. As history and recent events continue to make painfully clear, a cultural shift is not what's required in the Oakland Police Department. We are deeply concerned that there are over 40 recommendations in the OPD's organizational cultural section. And we believe that the only rational way forward is to actively divest from policing and invest in programs and services that are proven to support communities and increase safety. We urge the City Council to place less emphasis on changing the culture of OPD and more time finding ways to reallocate the budget from the police and invest in savings in community programs that save our community and save our lives. Many of the recommendations in the section call for more training for OPD. And again, I like to point out that the job of the task force is not to reform OPD. Again, not to reform OPD, but to reimagine public safety, develop radical reforms, and reallocate police resources to community programs. Within this section, we strongly support a number of recommendations. Number 6, we strongly support the elimination of the OPD helicopters. In addition to being an incessant annoyance that we all know for Oaklanders, the helicopters cost Oakland taxpayers $500,000 annually with little to nothing to show in terms of safety outcomes. Number 30, we strongly support removing officers with incidents of misconduct. Number 33, ending qualified immunity is one of the single most important radical rational reforms we can enact and to interrupt state violence. On the other hand, I'd like to highlight a handful of recommendations that we do not support. We do not support number 5, the recommendation to evaluate officers' candidates for implicit and explicit biases. Investigative journalists have recently reinforced what many of us already know. White supremacists, groups, and actors continue to populate law enforcement agencies across the country. Both the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, and the Oath Keepers have recently been exposed for their ties to both law enforcement and white ring hate groups. The very least we can do is screen candidates for these biases, read races, ideologies, and tendencies. Racists are attracted to policing because they know their ideology has a home there. That does not require screening alone. It requires dismantling and transformation. We also don't support recommendation number 12, train officers on the history of Black and Brown communities in Oakland. We have spent enough taxpayers' dollars, effort, and energy on police training, resulting in police policies and paper that does not do real change, and we're just very concerned about, because that change, we need to see real change. We need to see resources in their communities, and I just want to again touch the bases, as a person that's been in the system, a person who had opportunities, to someone that said, here's an opportunity for you, here's a job for you, here's workforce development, here's some education. What that result can be, I am the result of investment in our community, and that's what we need. And now I'll hand that over to Liz to share an analysis on the budget and data recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sabir. Thank you, Kat, as well. My name is Liz Huck. I am the Interim Executive Director of Oakland Rising, a multiracial collaborative of organizations dedicated to building political power for racial, economic, and environmental justice in the flatlands of East and West Oakland. We represent over 60,000 voter supporters. I grew up and currently reside in Deep East Oakland. I'm a parent of 2 Oakland public school children. I'm also just one of the members of the Budget Data Advisory Board of the task force, and one of over 100 volunteers across the 4 advisory boards of the task force who put time and work to find the recommendations and solutions to reimagining public safety. I'm proud to have played my very small role with my team members who carried the work forward in their spare time. Thank you, Oakland. You've made me proud to be from Oakland. As Kat mentioned, the primary goal and job of the task force is to make recommendations to reallocate the City of Oakland's budget. The city administrator and the mayor consistently keep allowing Oakland Police Department to spend way too much of our general fund on overtime. While all other departments are required to stay within their budget, the OPD is allowed to rampantly exceed their budget with unauthorized overtime. This doesn't add up to me. This imbalance in the budget shows us the moral crisis we are standing before today. We encourage the City Council to prioritize focus on the budget and data section of the recommendations. We support each of these recommendations, particularly from number 45 to 55. As you can see in the report, we support some and have added some crucial commentary to be considered as the City Council adopts these recommendations. But we also encourage the people of Oakland to stand with these budget recommendations. These recommendations move us away from focusing on criminalizing people for being poor or Black or brown or immigrant to how we can break away from the mindset that policing is the only solution to the violence we see. Violence that includes homicides and gun violence, but also include homelessness, our burgeoning housing crisis, poverty, low-wage jobs, and environmental justice. We need the people of Oakland to demand the city administrator and the mayor to implement policies that are put forward by the city council and not circumvent the process to prioritize more division and scarcity. There's a long list in the past year alone that shows that a city administrator and the mayor have failed to implement budget priorities put forward by the city council. Stop the nonsense and do the job that was set forward by the people of Oakland. It's not too late. There's a list of recommendations we're encouraging you to be ready to implement. Specifically, I'd like to call on recommendation 51. The city should prioritize and renegotiate the OPOA MOU. This MOU is extremely detrimental to Oakland's financial well-being and needs to be amended immediately. The city administrator closed out 2020 budget with $62 million shortfall. 35 million of that overspending came from OPD and 19 million of that was on unauthorized overtime. This simply cannot continue, and we appreciate the task force efforts to make the necessary changes Oakland needs to actually keep us safe. We heard it all summer and for the decades of works from folks on the ground in the community. Reimagine. We heard from organizations like Anti-Police Terror Project and the other organizations on the Defund coalition. The reason the task force is even called Reimagining Public Safety is the accumulation of years of hard organizing and service to raise our city to a moral high ground. That imagination has been passed down to us from our ancestors and our elders. The imagination to refund and restore is not new. We're just carrying the torch now. We're asking Oakland to stand with us because the time is now. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it over to James.
Thank you so much, Liz. My name is James Birch. I'm the Policy Director of the Anti-Police Terror Project and Justice Teams Network, and the President of the National Lawyers Guild Bay Area, and a member of the task force. I currently live in District 7 with my partner and child. I'm also the chair of the Alternatives Advisory Board. I'd like to thank the members of that advisory board who worked tirelessly on the 27 alternative responses, programs, and investments that we put forth as a recommendation. It's important to put these recommendations in context. Oakland spends well over $300 million a year on policing, comprising 44% of our general fund, while investments in health and social services for Oaklanders languish. The Schaaf administration's unprincipled and unrestrained spending on policing has not made Oakland safer. Instead, it has drained the city's resources, preventing us from investing in the things we know keep us safe. Oakland has increased the number of law enforcement officers since 2012, an investment that has not paid off for the people of Oakland. To make matters worse, OPD routinely overspends on its budget by tens of millions of dollars every year, with the apparent blessing of the Schaaf administration as accountability is never demanded. This year, OPD overspent its budget by over $30 million, with $19 million in unauthorized overtime. The Oakland Police Department spent the Schaaf administration, spent $2.2 million in overtime spending in one night, policing a protest this coalition held against the reckless curfew imposed by Libby Schaaf. This type of reckless spending has placed the city in financial jeopardy and led to the Schaaf administration unilaterally slashing budgets across city departments. Oakland's budget is unsustainable due to its spending on policing. Any budget analyst who looks at Oakland's numbers will tell you so. Our system of public safety is therefore unsustainable. It's clear that the only path forward is by stripping resources from an ineffective and violent system and investing those resources in programs that are shown to actually make communities safer by providing people the resources they need to thrive. This is not only a moral imperative, it is an economic imperative. All of the available numbers serve to show that across the country, municipalities will be forced to reconcile with the fact that spending the lion's share of their budgets on policing is a failed strategy if the desired outcome is public safety. We need to make the shift, and we need to make it now. People are suffering under the weight of COVID-19 and the resulting economic collapse, and resources need to be freed up to provide Oaklanders with the safety and stability they need immediately. With all that said, I'll return to the recommendations. Of the recommendations, there are several that we'd like to highlight as being particularly effective at cutting the excessive police budget by 50% and investing in resources that are demonstrated to ensure greater community safety. We're in strong support of recommendations 57, 58, and 60, which would provide non-police responses to mental health crises, substance abuse, and interpersonal violence. By investing in macro, MH First, and civilian community ambassador programs, the city will ensure that all civilians have a safe place to turn in the midst of a crisis. Upwards of 50% of all people killed by law enforcement are in the middle of a mental health crisis. This includes a disproportionate number of Black and Brown victims. That's why MH First was launched by the Anti-Police Terror Project. MH First is Oakland's first and only model for non-police response to mental health crises, substance abuse, and interpersonal violence. Our communities deserve experts to approach mental health crises, community conflict, or other conflicts with compassion and care, not a badge and a gun. We strongly support recommendation 59, which would move most traffic violations to OCDOT. Police traffic stops remain one of the leading entry points to violent police interactions for Black and Brown people, as those drivers are pulled over at disproportionate rates and suffer disproportionate harm, including incarceration and death from police engagement. Writing a speeding ticket does not require a badge and a gun. We support efforts to end the criminalization of homelessness and addiction by investing in mobile street outreach and harm reduction programs. We support the staffing floor being removed from Measure Z when Measure Z is amended. The OPD staffing floor is a restriction on our efforts to reduce the number of police and thus needs to be addressed if we are to move forward. Finally, to a recommendation that we do not support, we unequivocally reject recommendation 63. That would allow neighborhoods the power to determine the level of roving patrols. This recommendation does not live up to the task force's goal of reimagining public safety, as it's simply encouraging a continued reliance on a broken system of policing that fails our communities. As Oakland continues to gentrify, we've seen multiple examples of white residents using the police as a weapon and endangering the lives of Black BIPOC community members. The task force should prioritize recommendations that create the largest shifts in how public safety is defined and not reinforce the status quo. I want to again thank the members of the Alternatives Advisory Board for their selfless efforts on this project. Countless volunteer efforts were dedicated to providing recommendations that could be of service to the people of Oakland, on top of the countless hours advisory board members already contribute to their communities and to making Oakland a safe and healthy place for everyone. With that, I'll hand it over to Maureen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, James. And thank you to all the organizers and volunteers who have made the enormity of today possible. My name is Maureen Benson. I'm a member of the Data and Budget Advisory Board, chair of the OPD Budget and Staffing Work Group, and a former Oakland Police Commissioner appointed by the community. I've lived in District 7 for the past 16 years and in District 3 for 5 years before that. and have strived to be of service to these communities as long as I've lived here as a public school educator, community volunteer, and organizer. I'm honored and humbled to be with you all today. In the legal barriers and obstacles section, one recommendation I'd like to highlight our strong support for is the call to cap OPD overtime. The OPD and SHAF administration have refused to address the consistent overspending. This year, the administration's failure to regulate OPD spending forced the city to make dramatic budget cuts across the board. I'd also like to call out recommendations 92, 93, and 94 because we do not support any of these. For example, 92 recommends a mandate that OPD possess a college degree and are over the age of 25. This is a recommendation that does not reimagine public safety and only serves to reinforce the status quo. Further, we do not support number 7, the recommendation to establish a Department of Public Safety. We don't support this recommendation because community-based violence interruption should not be affiliated with or connected to the Oakland Police Department. Public safety programs affiliated with the police are often reduced to little more than efforts to burnish the police department's reputation. Community safety programs must be independent from police departments for them to be effective. In sum, the task force must remain true to the mission and mandate of this body. The polls, the surveys, community meetings, and town halls have made it clear that Oaklanders do not want reforms that require further resources for policing, including recommendations for reforms that would inadvertently require an increase in police funding. The task force must prioritize recommendations that resource our community, not law enforcement. And now I'll hand it over to Ivan.
Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan Garcia, and I'm a member of the Oakland Youth Advisory Commission, as well as the co-chair of the Youth Advisory Board. I first want to highlight the dedication shown by all advisory boards, and especially the Youth Advisory Board, in creating our recommendations. Our board was composed of youth from all over Oakland, most of whom had personal ties and experiences to the issue of policing. And thus, we built a strong and intersectional coalition of young people throughout our city who are really pushing for the mission of the task force. Through a youth community survey, a youth conference, and utilizing social media, we gathered input from our peers, which we then used to come up with several recommendations that will be incorporated into the recommendations made by the other advisory boards. And so of these recommendations, there are a few that I want to highlight that I believe would be most helpful in helping the task force achieve its goal of decreasing the policing budget by 50%. We, the youth of Oakland, are asking for resources to be committed to support youth homelessness and youth mental health. If we want young people to thrive in our city, we have to make sure that they have access to safe and stable housing and that there are alternatives to police when dealing with crises. This includes investing in affordable housing and not expensive condos. And we must also remove police and security guards from all of our schools and replace them with counselors and violence interrupters who can provide students and teachers with the tools we need to create safe learning environments. So as a young person in the city of Oakland, the decisions made by the task force and city council will have the largest impact on my life and the lives of my peers. My future is Oakland's future, and I am ready, and I have been ready, and we have all been ready to reimagine our future. We are building the Oakland we will quite literally inherit. And so I'm ready for a future where everyone is safer because we all have the resources we need to thrive. I envision a future where everyone in Oakland has access to shelter, mental health services, safety, and more. And together, especially with the Youth Advisory Board incorporating our recommendations into a lot of the other recommendations that have already been supported by this coalition, I know that we can make that a reality. And so with that, I will hand it back over to Kat.
Wow, Ivan, thank you. Fire. Our young people, I often get asked, like, what sustains me in this work, and it is definitely our young people, right? That I know are going to pick up the mantle and do it bigger and better than we did. I want to shout out Isha Clark, who's on this call, one of the baddest youth organizers coming out of Oakland. Sister Isha, we have so much love for you and so excited about the ways you're going to contribute to the liberation of our people. So So that is our response to the report. The full report can be found in the chats. Catalina, can you drop it again so that it is easily accessible to the reporter? If you're on the APTP list, you will get all of this emailed to you along with the press release. That said, we've got, we ended ahead of time. Good job, team. Are there questions? If so, please put them in the chat. And we'll give folks a few minutes to do that if they so choose. Okay, well, I'm not gonna have a sit here. Okay. I I was just told by the team, you can also unmute yourselves and ask questions if you don't want to type them, reporters. Isha says, how can community members and organizations outside of the task force support our work? James, why don't you take that and include the timeline, the last 2 meetings of the task force and what are the ways community can be the most impactful. I will say, share the report everywhere, everywhere, spread the word. But James, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Isha, one thing that community members and organizations can do is definitely plug in. I'm going to get the dates for you and put them in the chat so everybody has them for the schedule for the remainder of the task force. But briefly, the task force has to make the decision on what recommendations it's going to bring through to the city council, and then the city council needs to vote on them. And so what we want from the people and vested community members and stakeholders is your input during this process. It's needed. We've attempted to get as much input as we possibly could over the last 6 months or so. And the time is now to get your input in to make sure that all voices are heard during this process, especially those of the youth.
Also for journalists, if once you realize that we gave you the report as the press conference began, if you make your way through the report, then questions, you can call the number on the press release, which will get you to me, or you can send an email and we'll figure out the best person for you to speak with. How many recommendations we don't support total out of the 114? James, can you count them while I they're actually, so what I can say is that I was expecting to not support a lot more, right? Like I was deeply concerned about what we were going to get, and that in part is related to some of the commentary I made earlier on in the process. I am overjoyed by what we got. I mean, we got progressive, smart, tactical, strategic, doable recommendations from 4 committees, even inside the OPD culture and organization, right? Which is, we had 44 recommendations. Wasn't happy that there was so much weight placed on that because this task force is not about OPD, but even inside of there, some really, really smart stuff.
There are 6, Kat. There are 6 recommendations that we do not support.
So 6 recommendations we strongly don't support. There's probably a couple of more that we're just like, whatever, because they weren't relevant to the process. But, yeah. Thanks, Keith. Any more questions for our panelists about what you heard, the report, next steps? We covered the history of Defund. All right. Well, you know how to find us. It's on your press release, and thank you so much for coming. The next couple of weeks are critically important as the task force wraps up its process, and then of course the council begins its process. There you go, James is putting the task force. Community feedback is being gathered from March 1st to the 12th. Catalina, can you drop the report one more time just to ensure that everybody can access it? It will be up on the APTP website in the next hour or two. All right, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for all your support and all of your work. You guys are the best. Refund, restore, imagine. We're on the way. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kat.
Bye, thank you.